Our next topic in the course is about Asian American family formation and community formation, both the past and more contemporary times. First, we will focus upon the family, and then we'll follow that with a discussion of community formation. Now, going back to the mid 1800s through 1965, when the 1965 immigration law was passed, the issue of family during this time has been a central topic in Asian American studies and Asian American history. But this is because Asian Americans share a unique history in this regard. Okay, in other words, the family issue is not a central topic due to the prominence of Asian families. And by the way, when you think of other immigrant groups at the time that are coming here, especially Europeans, you see the proliferation of families, right? European families of immigrant background. But in Asian American history, we see the lack of Asian families. So this is the central topic, the lack of. And this state of affairs was caused by various obstacles faced by Asian immigrants to establish families in the United States. And by the way, here it helps to define family. And here I define it in a conventional way, conventional form. That is, a mother, father, and children residing together. Okay, this is also known as a quote nuclear family unquote or nuclear household. And also later, by the way, we'll discuss how some Asians socially constructed and innovated upon family formation, going beyond the so-called nuclear family. But in any case, a major obstacle that earlier Asians faced in the formation of family came in a few ways. One was through nativism, virulent nativism, and their threats, right, to extinguish Asian immigration, curtail it as much as possible at the very minimum. But they were successful in lobbying for laws. So not only do you see nativism, but ultimately institutional barriers. And to be more precise, the law itself. So these two actors here are involved, or these two forces are involved here in, again, precluding the possibility of a definitive community formation comprised of extensive families of Asians. For one, we see the law and we see policies that place drastic limitations, if not outright prevention, on the establishment of Asian American families in the U.S. And ultimately, this plays a role in hindering community formation itself, right? That is, different families forming a co-ethnic enclave, like many other immigrant groups do outside of Asia. And hence you see that link between family and community, by the way. So from the very beginning in Asian American history, it was U.S. capitalism, the needs of capitalism, that required a quote cheap labor pool unquote of Asian males. For Chinese women, we see restriction upon them, and this is seen with probably most notoriously with the Page Act. And the cumulative result here was the difficulty in Asian Americans in, family formation in the U.S., especially compared again to other ethnicities. And, you have to think about those ethnic neighborhoods in New York and Chicago and a lot of ethnic families, right, that are coming here from Europe. This does not happen on a similar scale, that is, when it comes to this earlier history of Asians. Now, besides that, additionally, even if they or Asian immigrants, the men who came over here, desired to establish families in the U.S. without the presence of Asian women, well, there's such a thing as anti-miscegenation laws. And anti-miscegenation laws, again, is laws that prohibit the sexual relations and marriages among different races, and certainly applied to persons of Asian descent back then. So this obviously affects the possibility of family formation. And again, it demonstrates how the state or the government, right, shapes and influences family formation of Asians in the United States rather than the normal quote unquote case of, just simple personal desire of the individual to form a family. That's not enough in the case of Asians. You see the law intervening here, the U.S. state, that again prevents this from happening on a wide scale level. Now, it's important to think about family formation and how it connects again to the contradiction at that time. And here again, I'm echoing the nativist sort of theme here, the theme of nativism. You have the economic need of the country at that time for cheap labor that directly contradicts the political needs, that is to say, anti immigration, nativism, preserving racial homogeneity of the nation. So, where does family formation fit in there? Well, the possibility of this, again, wide scale proliferation of Asian families that would settle permanently in the US obviously affects the racial status quo at that time. Okay, it's a threat to the racial homogeneity of the country. So, as one scholar put it, her name is Lisa Lowe, the quote, Asian reproductive family, unquote, is feared by nativists, and they use the law to prevent that from happening. That's to say, family formation and permanent settlement, and certainly community formation. So, to quote her again, Lisa Lowe, quote, the racialized non-citizen labor force, which precluded reality of Asian reproductive families via gender exclusion and thus permanent settlement in the United States, unquote. Okay, so that was their predicament, yet at the same time, in an economic sense, they're seen as necessary to build capitalism at that time. So look at that, it's a peculiar state here where they're needed yet not wanted. And how do you deal with that contradiction? Well, you deal with it through preventing family formation. Now, it's important to note here that in Asian American history, you have to take into account women immigration. And there was the older or earlier tendency of the pioneering historians in Asian American history to focus almost all their attention on male laborers because, after all, they're the predominant immigration numbers that are coming here, in gender terms. But a corrective to that right now is to discuss the plight and predicament of Asian American women as they migrated, and this, of course, is before 1965. And we also know, the first significant immigration was from China. So when we examine the immigration of Asian American women as a whole, we can note that factors or the particular factors linked to their sparse migration. Um, for example, Chinese women immigrants, as mentioned on the slide here, only 9,000 came during the 1800s. Well, to begin with those factors, we could focus upon the place of origin. In this case, let's look at China, with the earliest Chinese as Asian immigrants. And you can't ignore the patriarchal nature of traditional cultures of China. And not just China, even Japan. Women migrating from East Asia, they held a secondary status within these societies of their home countries. They were restricted not only in their relations to men, but also almost literally in their very movement. This is a society where girls were reared traditionally again, to serve men, to bear children, to follow gender decorum and gender roles. You know, a respectable woman, so to speak, did not travel far from her home. And you can see how, you know, that'd be frowned upon to think about migrating to the United States, right? Really, the only females who actually left their ancestral villages were girls from destitute families. And often it was the case that they were sold as servants or as prostitutes to work in larger towns and cities. Okay, so there's this restriction even in their home country. Now, putting culture aside, um, looking at the Asian male workers' practical point of view, the notion of, you know, again, practicality emerges, financial practicality to be precise. Namely, it was less costly to sustain their families in their homeland than to feed them in the United States. If they brought a family over, they understood that it's going to be costly, so it was more attractive financially for them to go to the U.S. while they leave any families they may have had behind. And also, eventually, they realized the hostilities they encountered in the American West, and many considered uh, these conditions, you know, on that side of the Pacific, right, the U.S. West, they considered them too unsafe for women, let alone children. So, you know, this figures into their practical calculus, so to say. Now, shifting from China to the U.S., we discover reasons unrelated to traditional culture. For example, from capitalism's point of view, um, labor recruiters initially wanted physically strong and single, unattached male workers. This is the ideal worker coming from China and eventually from Japan. The strong, young, single, unattached male, able to survive under rough conditions of work, able to do the intensive work. And according to gender norms back then, well, women physically lacked the capacity to do any of that hard work. It was believed back then. So many American industrialists also believed women accompanying men would serve as a distraction to the workers. So as a result of that, you have this term. It's kind of outdated, to be honest, but I still see it once in a while. It's called bachelor societies. And, you know, even though it's outdated, it is quite accurate in that it depicts young, unattached males as, you know, the primary formation of immigrants in the U.S. at that time. And again, if you look at the sparse number of Chinese women, 9,000, you could see how, compared to the hundreds of thousands of Chinese males coming here, how tends to pale in comparison and thus overshadow the role of Chinese women in this case in history.